Hey, hope you're doing well. This is Finx MTG here with a Commander deck tech on Ghyrson Starn Kelermorph. As you can see, this is a 3 mana cost commander. The Izzet colors of red and blue, a 3/2 with Ward 2. And that's a big effect here because if somebody wants to take him out, you have to pay an additional 2 colorless to target him. And the big ability here, when another source you control deals exactly 1 damage to a permanent or player, Ghyrson Starn deals 2 damage to that permanent or player. So every time you have a 1 damage spell or effect that's dealing damage to an opponent or an opponent's creature or anything like that, this guy turns that into a lightning bolt, a 3 damage total. So there's a few different ways you can build this deck. The way that we decided to go with here is pretty much a Cantrips style, where we're playing a lot of spells that trigger effects to deal 1 damage, which also trigger Ghyrson Starn to deal the additional 2 damage. There's another deck around that's doing the attacking with 1/1s or making your 1/1s unblockable and attacking with a lot of creatures. In practice, I found that one to be a little bit slow compared to the Cantrips version. And just like this style a little bit better. There's some other different ways you can make it. Right now we have this at a power level 7, and I'll put some notes in the description on the different power levels, but on a status from 1 to 10, 9 and 10 being CEDH, we'll put this at a level 7 because it does include an infinite combo. If you want to, you could play this as a 6, definitely. It's a lower power 7. And the great thing about this is you can play a lot of cards that are not expensive cards. You can throw them in here and you have an effective deck. One of the main ways to win with this deck, of course, would be using his ability to straight up deal a lot of damage to each opponent. You're hitting them for 3 damage every time there's a 1 damage effect. That's the first and main win condition. It does take a little time to develop. If the game's kind of drawn out, we also have another win condition in Niv Mizzet Perun. And I'll include the full deck list in the notes on the video if you want to check that out. Here we have a 6 mana card, which is a little tough to get out because it is 3 pips of blue and 3 pips of red here. But when he does come out, it's pretty good. He can't be countered. And whenever you draw a card, it deals 1 damage to any target. Again, adding that in with our commander, that means that's 3 damage every time you draw a card to any target on the board. And whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, it is going to trigger his ability as well to draw a card. Now, naturally, there's whole decks dedicated to this guy that use the infinite combo with Curiosity. And there's a couple different options on this one. We are using mainly Curiosity for the 1 blue pip on this. When an enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you draw a card. So the first time you draw a card, you deal 1 damage. And then every time you deal 1 damage, it's triggering Curiosity to draw another card, therefore triggering Niv Mizzet's ability again to deal 1 more damage. And so you have a loop there. And the great thing about this one is that with Curiosity, it's a May ability, so you won't deck yourself. You're not going to draw through your whole deck. You can draw as many cards as you want, and you could say, okay, I'm not going to take this action anymore. That is also the reason why we are using Ophidian Eye as another way to go infinite with our Niv Mizzet. It's the same ability, but it does have Flash. It costs 3 mana, and it has the same effect here. And again, you just cast those on there, and you have a way to trigger 1 damage, and you're off to the races. So that can be a powerful way to end the game if you need to. Put these down over here. There are also cards like Tandem Lookout, which can work with Niv Mizzet, but it's not a May ability, as we were talking about here with these two. And therefore, you would deck yourself and potentially lose the game if you don't have some type of combo that you can stop that interaction. Okay, and so what do we do to be able to trigger all of our commander's abilities here, right? We want to get into play something like Firebrand Archer. So there are a lot of creatures in Magic that have this ability. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So in gameplay here, when you get this out, you want to get Ghyrson Starn out as soon as possible, and then you want to get one of these pingers out as well. So once the pinger's out, then you're going to be triggering it, and it's going to be dealing 3 damage total because it's also using the commander's ability. And so we have a lot of these in the deck. We have Firebrand Archer, we have Kessig Flame Breather, non-creature spell, deals 1 damage to each opponent. So think about that. That's 3 damage on every spell you're casting to each of your opponents. Electrostatic Field, instant or sorcery spell, deals 1 damage to each opponent. We have 30 instant or sorcery spells in the deck. That's a lot of fuel for the fire for these cards. Electrode. Now you have to remember on this one, you can tap it and it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Whenever you play an instant or sorcery spell, you can untap Electrode. So the key here is when you have your cards on the board, you want to make sure you put them down in a way that you can remember your triggers correctly. Because this time, every time you're casting a instant or sorcery, you want to, before that, tap him to deal the 1 damage so that your cast will untap him. Then we have Thermo Alchemist. Deals 1 damage to each opponent when you tap him. And again, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you can untap this permanent. And Erebor Flamesmith, one from Lord of the Rings set. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So there you see the main cards where it deals damage per spell cast, right? This one is a little interesting. It's Exalted Flamer of Sentesh. Something like that. 4 mana, 2/4, but this has a nice ability. Besides dealing 1 damage to each opponent for instant or sorcery, it also has, at the beginning of your upkeep, return an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard to your hand. Since we're playing cantrips here, it doesn't really matter what we're returning because a lot of times a cantrip, you're casting a spell, having an effect, and also drawing a card. That's why it's a cantrip from the old magic card that used to do that. So what we want to do here is cast a bunch of spells and then, just start recurring them here, and we're getting 3 damage in every time when we're casting that. Spark Double is fun in this deck because you can not only use it on some of your pingers, but the primary target would be your commander. So it makes your clone of your commander +1/+1, and it makes them not legendary. And that's the most important feature here because otherwise you wouldn't be able to make a clone or a copy of your commander. So now for every 1 damage that's being dealt to the opponents, you're dealing 5 damage total. Again, that's 2 from your new commanders here, and then 1 from that original, your Exalted Flamer or whatever else you have out. So it's a nice trick you can play out. I would advise if you do play this card on your commander, only keep 1 of the pingers out maybe. If you start putting too many cards on the board, there's going to be a board wipe or something, and it's really going to set you back. So usually if I was copying the commander, I'd only put out 1 of the other pingers. And other than that, you usually want to have at least 2 pingers on the board. So you would have Ghyrson out, you'd have a pinger here and a pinger here, and then you could start going off to the races. That means you're dealing 6 damage on every spell that you cast, which is pretty incredible. And that puts a really short clock on the game. And the ideal situation is if you have another opponent that's playing, let's say, black or white, where they have the decks that make each opponent lose 1 life if a card is destroyed, if a creature is sacrificed or something like that. It really puts a quick clock on the game and makes it go in your favor because you can target exactly who you need to take out quickly. Roiling Vortex is a fun card that not a lot of people play, but it does a lot of work in this deck. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that includes yourself, it deals 1 damage to them. So this does trigger Ghyrson to hurt yourself for 3 damage, but you're hurting your opponents for 3 damage, and because the whole style of this deck is to burn your opponents down on their life total, it's still a good card. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast that spell, it deals 5 damage to that player. So this can stop some of the ridiculous cards like a Mana Crypt and stuff like that, Mox Amber, but it also can stop cascade spells. So if they're casting cascade spells, they're going to be taking 5 damage every time. And if somebody does have a life gain deck, which is going to put a lot of pressure on you because you can only deal so much damage with your commander, you can pay 1 red and your opponents can't gain life that turn. So it's a nice little feature on there, as you can see, with 3 different abilities that all coincide with what we're doing with the theme of this deck. So we have our pingers here. And to trigger the pingers, we need to have a lot of our cantrips and ways to draw cards and just continually cast spells. So ideally you get a board state where you have your commander out and you have the pingers. Then you start casting your spells. Faithless Looting, draw 2 cards and discard 2. 1 red, but you can flashback it from the graveyard. So you see we have the recursion here to just keep the flow going. Into the Royal is big in this deck. You can just cast it for 2 mana if you need to. Ideally you want to spend the 4 mana to draw an additional card. But this is what you use if the opponent has something that is stopping Storm. If you have a Deafening Silence or a Rule of Law effect, something that makes it so that you cannot cast more than 1 spell per turn, that is devastating to this deck and you need to do something to remove it. This is one of the primary ones. So in the turn that you're going to go off and do a lot of damage to that person, you use this first. We have Ral Storm Conduit is a great commander where all of your cantrips that you're casting, this guy triggers, deals 1 damage to the opponent with Ghyrson, of course, that turns into 3. And for the -2, when you cast your next instant or sorcery spell this turn, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. So those are the 2 main abilities. The +2 to scry 1, you really only want to do if you just want to keep this guy on the board from attacks coming in. Urabrass. This is a strong card. It's not necessarily needed in the deck, but it works so well, it synergizes. We have a first strike 4/4 for 4 mana, but he also has a Burgy type effect. Every time you're casting an instant or sorcery spell, it's dealing the 1 damage to opponent, so it's a pinger. It's also doing the Burgy God of Storytelling effect, which is a very powerful card, of adding 1 red mana. So this is how you can keep going through your cantrips and not run out of mana. You still get 1 red mana on every cast. Then it has this little secret weapon here. You can exile him and then return it back as a crazy saga here. So on this saga, the first one, you deal 3 damage to target opponent and each creature they control, create 3 treasure tokens. But then the last one, until end of turn, you can cast instant and sorcery spells from any graveyard. And if it would be cast this way, you exile in the end. And then you can return this after the saga is done. You return it to the battlefield flipped on the other side, which is, it comes back. It doesn't die. It doesn't just get removed, which is also incredible. So that last ability is really big. So if you get this guy on turn 4, then by turn 7, you should be having a situation where you can win. This guy's pretty powerful. It did come down in price, so I was able to throw it into this deck. Your standard cantrips like Ponder, look at the top 3 cards, draw a card. Jataxian Probe, you can cast this for 2 life. That's why it's in here, because you're looking at target player's hand, you're getting knowledge on the game, which is always important, and you need to know if somebody has some type of counterspell or some effect that can silence you or make you not able to cast the spells that you want to in a turn. And the draw a card, of course. Jessica's Will, just an all-around great card here. By exiling the top 3 cards of your library when you have your commander out and being able to play them that turn, if your cantrips are costing 1 or 2 mana, never cast this on turn 3. You want to do it when you still have some blue mana up and you have some mana available to be able to use that ability and really get the triggers on your pingers. And it also adds 1 red for each card in target opponent's hand. So you're adding a lot of red, have some blue on the board, cast extra cantrips. It just keeps going. This is a nice way to really close it out. Consider. Look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard, draw a card, just kind of standard there. Expressive Iteration, banned in a lot of formats because it provides so much value here. You can look at the top 3 cards of the library, 1 of them into hand, 1 on the bottom of the library, and exile 1. So you're basically drawing 2 cards here with this deck. You're being able to use 2 of them and hide a card that you don't like. Reverberate. Copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. Now you can, if you want to get crazy, cast this on Jessica's Will or something like that. You can also use this as a main point of interaction on opponent's spells. If they're targeting your commander with something, or if they're trying to do some crazy sorcery that you want to steal, you can use Reverberate. Opt. Scry 1, draw a card, standard. Thought Scour. This one's pretty cool because a lot of people are running Vampiric Tutor and cards that tutor cards at the top of their library. All those tutors like Enlightened Tutor, Worldly Tutor. This is an instant speed interaction for 1 blue. Target player mills 2 cards. You target an opponent, make them mill whatever they just tutored up to the top of their library, and you draw a card and you trigger your pingers. So it's very good in this deck. Windfall. If we're in a situation where we didn't get the best hand in the beginning, or we need to refuel for our next surge of cantrip spells and pinging the opponents, we use this one to refuel the hand. Needle Drop. This one deals 1 damage to target creature or player that was dealt damage this turn. And again, that's going to be 3 damage with Ghyrson. So if there's a bigger creature on the board and you need to get rid of them, you can use one of your smaller guys to block or something like that, and then you can finish them off with this and draw a card at the same time. Arcane Denial, a counter spell that allows you to draw a card. Yes, it lets the opponent draw 2 cards, but you want to use this on something that's going to either stop you from winning or enable the opponent to win on their turn there. So you're stopping a game-ending factor, triggering your guys here, and then countering the spell. Electrolyze, 3 mana, deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 target creatures and or players. Now remember, this doesn't matter if you're targeting an opponent or if you're targeting their creatures. So you can really keep the board clear. You can kill, if they have those low toughness commanders coming out, you can just ping off their commanders. This get very expensive for them to play those commanders. So this one, of course, you want to divide it 1 damage to one item, 1 damage to another, and then you draw a card. Gut Shot is in here. Again, a free, pay 2 life to cast this. Deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Oh, and then we have the Beta Prodigal Sorcerer, which is in here because it's a beautiful card. So there was people that made this deck with just these type of, these are the Timmy decks, right? This is the original Timmy, where you tap it to deal 1 damage to any target. Now the problem is that it costs 3 mana, it's a 1/1, and it's a little bit outdated. When I tried to do the deck in this style, it was very slow. There's also a Prodigal Pyromancer in red that has the same effect. There's a number of these cards, but the deck is just too slow like that. You have to get these guys on the board. They can only tap once. There's even cards that maybe you can untap them, but by the time you get that going, your opponent's already tried to win several times, and you're not going to be able to do it. I feel like this version is much better. The reason this guy is in here, because with our commander, we can ping off other people's commanders and other smaller creatures, and it's good to finish things up because it's any target. Grape Shot deals 1 damage to any target, but the key here is that it has Storm. So this is a game-ending card. For every copy, every spell that you've cast before, you are copying this, basically having a lot of instances on the stack. So every instance is dealing 1 damage, with your commander is dealing 3 damage. So that's pretty incredible right there. Imagine you cast 5 spells in the turn and then cast Grape Shot. That's I can't even do the math on how much damage you can do with depending on how many pingers you have out, but that should be a game ender there. Or you can eliminate 1 player or 2 players if you need to specifically. Here we have Past in Flames. Sometimes we're going to go through our cantrips and maybe we didn't close out the game. So we have each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. And the flashback is its mana cost. And even if you have to discard this for some reason, you can flash it back from the graveyard as well. So this enables you twice to recur a lot of the items in your graveyard if you need to. And we're back to the front with Faithless Looting there. So you see a number of cantrips there. We have, again, 30 spells total in the deck. We also have some separate draw card engines. We have Quicksilver Dagger, which you can equip to any creature. You could equip it to the Prodigal Sorcerer if you want. But the main item here is that if you equip this on your commander, every time it deals, you tap it to deal 1 damage to target player and you draw a card. So right there is a nice little way to loop some card draw. Echo of Eons. I love this card. It's a mini time twister. For 6 mana, you can do a time twister effect, reshuffling your graveyard into your library when you went through all your cantrips and you need a new hand. The other trick here is that if you need to discard this for whatever reason, it has flashback of 3, which is the cost of a time twister. You can have that effect, which is amazing. So the ideal way is if you can get that in your graveyard somehow. Pull from Tomorrow. This would be a way of how you could get Echo of Eons in your graveyard as well. You draw X cards and discard a card. Remember, so this is 1 less than Stroke of Genius, which means 1 more card, which is why it's worth it. We don't really care if you have to discard a land or if you have to discard of Echo of Eons or the other cards with flashback that we had. And again, you want to cast this at the end of the opponent's turn before you because it is an instant, and that is the key factor there. You can hold up your mana for interaction and then boom, use it. Archmage Emeritus. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. So this card is great because it just keeps helping you refuel your hand. Those are some of the main card draw items. We also need some board wipes. So when the board's getting a little out of hand, somebody's got too much artifacts. If there's an artifact deck, we have Destroy Target Artifact you don't control or Overload, which you should really be playing for as a board effect for 5 mana, Vandal Blast. Blasphemous Act. If there's too many creatures on the board, if you have one of a Knight deck, a Squirrel deck, an Elf deck, any of those decks that have a lot of creatures and they're starting to get big, you wipe the board with this one. Again, our commander is only 3 mana, so he can die once or twice and we can still keep getting him out if we need to. Chandra Awakened Inferno. So this is another type of closer in this deck. What you do is if you +2, it gives each opponent an emblem that deals 1 damage to them during their upkeep. Now, this does not trigger with your commander because the way Magic rules work, the owner of the emblem is that player. So it's not source you control that would trigger your commander, if you can see that on the text there. But still, that means if you do this once, twice, 3 times, they're going to be taking up to 3 damage on the beginning of every one of their turns, which it puts another, again, we're trying to run the clock on the game as fast as possible. It also can be a board wipe here, deals 3 damage to each non-elemental creature. And then, if you need to, you can minus X, deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, and if it was a permanent, you can exile it when it dies. So again, a bunch of options there, but you start plussing it, and it can start adding up the damage pretty significantly there. And to make sure we have mana for some of the big effects, we have your standard Soul Ring here. Midnight Clock is an interesting one. A lot of people love targeting this. This is one of the flex spots in the deck where it works great sometimes, and other times it just draws a lot of attention. People do not want you drawing 7 cards. And what happens is after it gets to the, keep in mind, it's on every upkeep, you put an hour counter. And when it gets to the 12th hour, you reshuffle your hand, whether you want to or not, and draw 7 cards and exile the clock. Also a mana rock there as well. Wayfarer's Bauble. We don't really have that many ways to gain additional mana in play with this deck. Although the commander's low, we do have some big costing spells like 6 and up. So we have something like Wayfarer's Bauble to get more lands onto the battlefield, and that allows us to really go off with the cantrips and not run out of mana when we're trying to storm off. We have Iron Mirror. It kind of does everything we want. It's a 1/1. It adds red mana if we need the mana, or it can just attack a player if they're open, if they're playing where they don't cast a lot of creatures in the beginning. We can hit them for 1, again, triggering Ghyrson Storm's ability to make it into 3 damage. Arcane Signet, and back to the original Soul Ring. So we have a lot of the standard ones there. There's also some nice utility cards that we included here as well as we shake the camera. Shake it but don't. Siren Storm Tamer. 1 blue mana here, 1/1. Flying, so it can sneak in for those attacks to deal the 1 damage. It can also protect your commander for 1 blue mana. If somebody targets it and they play that word cost, you can still counter the ability. So it's a protection card. Basilisk Collar. This one's just a lot of fun. You just equip this to your commander. He has Death Touch and Lifelink. That means that if any of your pingers hit a creature, it doesn't matter if you're hitting like a Toxroll or anything else that has more than 3 toughness, the Death Touch with the damage coming in, and as this says, directly from Ghyrson Starn, that means that the Death Touch will kill them. And the lifelink, you're going to be gaining a lot of life when Ghyrson's pinging each opponent on all of those effects that we cast here. The Locust God, this is a nice way to play a big creature that has a big impact here. Whenever you draw a card, you create a 1/1 blue and red insect token, with the key being it has flying and haste. So that coupled with the cantrips and your commander, you can pretty much in 1 turn usually finish off at least 1 player with this one. And if you're in a jam, you can always pay 4 mana, draw a card, then discard a card, searching for some type of answer for the board state. And then, of course, if it dies, it is one of the god creatures, so it comes back to your hand at the beginning of the next end step. So once he's out, it's very hard to get rid of. Third Path Iconoclast. This one is a bit of a flex spot as well. I know we're not going for the creature-centric playstyle, but we do need some presence on the board when some people start attacking us with creatures. This is actually used so that our cantrips create 1/1 colorless soldier artifact creature tokens, and when they're coming on the board, we're just using them for chump blocks, or if we need to sneak in some extra damage, if we have a lot of them, we can swing into a player with those as well. But we need some chump blockers to be able to not take too much damage from a wave of creatures coming at us. Swiftfoot Boots is another protection spell here, using that on Ghyrson Starn. There was originally more protection type features in this deck, but it was a bit too slow. I figured 1 ended up being enough. You could also use the haste ability on some of your other creatures if you need to, or if you need a pinger right away. Stormkiln Artist. 4 mana is a little expensive, but it's a 2/2. Whenever you cast one of your spells, you create a treasure token. And that's a way to, you start just by casting a few spells, and you can build into a really big turn where you have plenty of extra mana. You're not going to run out of mana, and you just keep going with the spells, drawing card, playing that spell, drawing another card. We have Gamble if we need to have a solution. We get a card. Now, a number of the cards have flashback, remember, so even if you're discarding the card that you did draw, if you were going for that one, you can use the flashback cost, or there's ways to cast it from the graveyard with some of our effects here. Slip out the back. This is a nice little tricky card here for the Mafia to slip out the back. So Ghyrson will be in play, and then he just kind of slips out the back here and phases out. He comes in on the beginning of your untap step. So he comes in, untaps, and then you go to your upkeep, I believe. So he'll be out for any board wipes that any other opponents are playing. So if somebody's targeting your guy or if there's a board wipe, you can cast that. Shadow Spear, this is a pretty powerful card, but it has a big ability here. Again, with the trample and lifelink is there. The lifelink's nice, but you can pay 1. Permanents your opponents control lose hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So if they think that they're fine with hexproof from your commander being able to hit them or any of your pingers, they are not fine. This card will change all of that. Hemin's Aura, 3 mana. It's a little bit pricey, but 1 blue, you can untap Enchanted Creature. Again, you can put that on the pingers that tap to deal 1 damage, and you can pay 1 blue to untap them and tap them again. Again, it's a little crazy like that. You can put it on your commander as a protection spell with the 3rd ability here. Enchanted Creature can't be the target of spells or abilities this turn. So you see there's a couple of different options there, or you could put it on something like Niv Mizzet or another one for protection as well. Double Vision. Every cantrip turns into 2 cantrips, and so much damage that the game's going to be over. If you can get this out for 5 mana, because it is a little expensive. But we had to put that one in there just because it went so well with the deck. So there you have a number of our utility cards and protection spells. Put this one over here. But besides protection, we also need to stop what the opponent is doing. So we have items like our standard counterspell with the Commander Legends Full Art, which is my favorite. We have Wash Away. This is great for those commanders that are just big bruisers that come out and they do so much work that you can't really stop them once they come out. If something like a Tivit or a Traxa or something like that, you can pay 1 blue mana and you can counter that spell if it was not cast from the opponent's hand. So that's why it's pretty good. Otherwise, you can pay 3 and you can counter any spell if you need to. Delay. If there's something that's a board wipe, if we can do 1 delay and we can get our big turn. So like let's say they're casting a board wipe, you have Ghyrson and 3 pingers out, right? You cast this spell, stop the board wipe. By the time that's going to come around again, you're going to have a turn where you're going to be dealing 30 damage to your opponents and they should be out of the game. And remember, they're taking damage from other things if they have other people dealing damage to them, if they have fetch lands, if they're paying life for tutors or something like that. We have Suspend, exile target creature, and put 2 time counters on it. The interesting thing is sometimes when you exile the people's commanders, they have the option of putting it in exile with the 2 time counters or putting it back into the command zone. Either way, for 1 blue mana, you've taken that out of play for at least 1 turn, which is what you need to do. Dagger Caster. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and 1 damage to each creature your opponents control. Coupled with the commander, again, that is 3 damage to each creature, 3 damage to each opponent. That is a ton of damage, over 9 damage across the board there. And the Festivities. This is a sorcery that has the same effect. Deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. So if they do have a planeswalker, it's going to be taking 3 damage. Shatter Skull Smashing. This is one of the MDFCs that can switch into a land where you pay 3 life and it comes in untapped. But ideally, we want to be using this for the ability here, where you can deal X damage divided as you choose among up to 2 target creatures and or planeswalkers. So again, if you're just putting X equals 2 for 4 mana, you can choose 1 damage here, 1 damage here, trigger your commander and use it from that. Or if you really need 6 or more, you can do this big one, big heavy hitter here. Inferno Titan. This ends up being a bit of a board wipe in this deck and is pretty incredible. Whenever he enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets. So that's 1 damage to 3 different targets, which Ghyrson turns into 3 damage. So you're dealing 9 damage the turn he comes in, 9 damage whenever he attacks, and he's a 6/6 that can get pumped as well. So if you can clear all of the small blockers on one opponent's board, you might be able to finish them off with this at this point in the game. Chaos Warp. When you need a solution and there is no way to get through, I mean, this targets any permanent, whether it's a land, if there's an artifact, there's an enchantment, a creature, you use this one if it's going to end the game and you need to survive. Those are the interaction type spells here, some of the additional damage and board wipes as well, and exiling permanents, removing permanents from play. Then we get to some of the lands here. So we do have some interesting lands in this deck that go with the theme. We have this one, Desert enters the battlefield. It deals 1 damage to target player, triggering your commander. Shivan Gorge. Now this one, you pay 3 for a total when you're tapping this one. It deals 1 damage to each opponent. So with your commander out, this is dealing 9 damage for 4 mana every turn. Pretty incredible on a land. Witch's Clinic. Target commander gains lifelink until end of turn. Nice to play this and use it on your commander. Get extra life back. Again, your life total might be pressured in the beginning because you're not having as many creatures that you want to block with, so you might be open for some attacks. You really got to get going. This one is a detection tower, similar to the effect on Shadow Spear, where we can target creatures that can't be targeted. If they had hexproof, it makes them lose hexproof and you can target them again. War Room, our commander is only 2 colors, so we only have to pay 2 life, tap this for 3, and draw a card. This is when we run into a tough spot and we really need some card draw. Myriad Landscape is in here because we need some ways to get additional lands into play. You saw some of those 6-cost cards, and there's not a lot of ways to ramp in red and blue. This is one of the ways to do it here. Reliquary Tower, because the card looks cool, and why not throw it in? The Cantrips should technically keep your hand size pretty high because you're replacing every card. And then if you're playing something like Pull From Tomorrow, you can be drawing a lot of cards. And your standard Steam Vents. You could also put a card, one of the fetch lands in here to get this one out of your deck if you want to play with that as well. So those are your special lands that we have. And then, we have your standard mountains, islands, all this command tower from the Warhammer set as well. And if you want to get a little crazy, these cards, so this is the deck right here. But if you want to get a little crazy and put some of the saltier cards or meaner cards, you can play cards like Charisma. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage to a creature, you control that creature as long as Charisma remains in play. If you play this on your Particle Sorcerer, that means every turn you could be stealing an opponent's creature, and they can't really do anything about it until this enchantment is removed. There's also ways like Nimbleclaw Adept to untap your guys and then tap them again for additional damage. I've had turns like that where you're doing, over 9 damage on the board, which is pretty incredible. And then we have cards like Vanishing. If you need more protection, you can phase out your commander or one of your key cards there as well. So these 3 were in the deck at one point. They were taken out. There's also another one, the Sigil of Sleep, which I don't currently have wrapped up in the sleeves here, but that one, whenever you deal damage to a creature, you can return it to the opponent's hand. So those are pretty frustrating cards, that and Charisma, for an opponent to play against. So I kind of like the play style of just doing the direct damage, and it's a more fun way to win, in my opinion. So again, that is the deck tech for Ghyrson Starn Kelermorph, one of the Warhammer precons. You get it from the Warhammer precons, but you can do some crazy stuff with it, as you can see here. If you want to see the full deck list, check out the notes below, and enjoy the rest of your day.